Censorship and freedom of speech in Lebanese media. Freedom of speech is an extremely important element that defines democracies, and without it, citizens would be unable to criticize their governments and hold them accountable. Therefore, it is vital to protect freedom of speech. However, censorship is on the rise around the world, especially in the Middle East, even among democracies. In this video, I'll be focusing on censorship and freedom of speech in Lebanon. I will argue that in spite of Lebanon being more open than the rest of the countries in the region, freedom of speech is still restricted, controlled, and manipulated. These restrictions are sectarian and power-based. The media in Lebanon is influenced by the unstable political situation in Lebanon and the neighboring countries. But I'll also be comparing the situation in Lebanon with another democracy in the Middle East, and that is Turkey, and the more consolidated democracies in the region, the European Union. I was also fortunate to speak to Censorship Module-University, a writer and director of theater and film who had a couple of run-ins with the Censorship Bureau. In a volatile environment, the media becomes a vital instrument for individuals and groups that aim to influence the public's opinions, beliefs, and overviews about certain issues. In 2014, Lebanon fell prey to spillover violence from Syria's civil war. The Syrian crisis had a huge impact on freedom of expression, resulting in major consequences throughout the region. A major consequence of the spillover was the polarization of the media in Lebanon, as the media began to operate as a tool for channeling propaganda to better serve politicians and businessmen. 2014 also witnessed the decline of freedom of expression in Turkey. In spite of the diversity of the Turkish media, it became blindingly polarized, with biased outlets representing different political and social parties and reporting prearranged material. We can also see that some countries outside the region also struggling with freedom of expression. Take, for example, the European Union. A union of 28 member states share common European values, but are practiced differently. Some of these values include freedom of expression. For example, Finland, Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden are among the best places for freedom of expression, whereas Italy, Hungary, Greece, and Romania fall short. Lebanon has always been portrayed as a hub for human rights and freedom of expression in the Arab world. Freedom of expression is a civic right protected by the Lebanese constitution in addition to international treaties that Lebanon has signed with other parties. Intellectually and artistically, Beirut has always been more open than the rest of the neighboring countries in the region. However, with the escalating political situation in the Middle East and the rise of extremist groups, there is a direct threat to freedom of expression in the country. The media in Lebanon, with its lack of objectivity and constraints on the development of independent media, has caused some serious threats to freedom of expression. Unlike other Arab countries where the state controls the media, Lebanese media is controlled by sectarian politics that reflect certain foreign affairs and is a stage for public officials. The freedom of expression and independent media in Lebanon face many obstacles, including political groups and individuals that have control over ownership, content, and the distribution of licenses of media. Outdated laws that led to low liability in the media sector, lack of organization between public institutions and media regulating bodies, unclear laws, standards, and regulations in the censor system, and the inaccessible information of laws. If we take a look at the media freedom in EU countries, we can also see some similar challenges. For example, media ownership patterns, political and state pressure in the operation of the media, strict regulation of the media concentration in the EU poses a significant challenge, failing to protect plurality, and political interference in the way the media works. In many EU member states, the system of media regulation is implemented by the member states, and this allows the state and politicians to interfere in the workings of the media, thus increasing pressure on media outlets and jeopardizing freedom of expression. In Lebanon, the threat to freedom of expression and corruption in the media sector has led to the increase in censorship on all literary and artistic work. The Censorship Bureau falls under the complete jurisdiction of the General Directorate of General Security. They are assisted by the Ministry of Information, the Special Administrative Committee, the National Audiovisual Media Council. However, they are highly influenced by political parties and religious authorities, both Christians and Muslims, that have great influence in the review process and are regularly consulted, which adds even more complexity and chaos to the censoring process. And a perfect case study would be Censorship Module-University. Censorship Module-University is a writer and director of theater and film who has been attacked several times by the Censorship Bureau. He spoke to me about how the Bureau operates and how censorship has affected his work.
Censorship here in Lebanon, it's done by the Bureau of Censorship, which is attached to the General Security. First, putting this assignment in the hands of military people is the first problem. These military people, they tackle media from a different perspective than civilians, of course. as a theater artist, it's affecting me in the way where, for example, I had 2 plays that were banned, and it's affecting me because as economic pressure, this puts pressure on me to conform and to do something that might be accepted by the censorship bureau. This is creating a lot of pressure on my artistic work and life because I cannot work as having plays banned. If I do the plays, not only I will get a very hefty fine, I will also risk that the theater where the play is done gets closed down. And it needs a court order to be reopened. So it's a big thing. So yeah, we are in a way being oppressed in this. Of course, I could use alternative media, but then these alternative media, especially the internet, where there's a bit of flexibility more than offline, will not make any economic. I live from theater. There was censorship in UK, for example, at some point. There's a theater director, John Littlewood, who got arrested twice because she was doing plays and her actors were improvising during the play, stuff like that. But at some point in the 70s, I think, it was the Lord Chamberlain office and it got cancelled. So everywhere in the world there was at some point in time censorship, but when people advance in progress, if you want, as civilization, they realize that when you ban something, it's not actually going to stop the idea.
The Censorship Bureau has complete authority to licensing, monitoring, censoring creative works. They censor foreign and local publications, magazines and books, and films on the principles of protecting political and religious views and national security affairs. They have the right to prohibit the entry of a foreign publication and confiscate copies of it. They can suspend TV stations. They can also censor cinematic works from the preliminary stage. Now, the problem lies in the lack of clear regulations and no definite laws and standards by which the Bureau follows. For example, a film may be banned from the cinemas, but released on DVD. Reasons for censorship are vague as there are no definite laws, but the most obvious are the following. We start off with political reasons, and that includes safeguarding relations with Arab regimes, respecting foreign affairs with allied countries, banning attacks on the Palestinian cause and Arabs in general, censoring content that would disrupt civil peace, and the relations with enemy states that demands the boycott of all Israeli products based on the national law that was maintained by a special office within the Arab League called the Central Boycott Office. Second, we have religion. Offensive topics addressed towards Christianity or Islam is sent to the Catholic Information Center or the Dar al-Fatwa Ifta, which is Lebanon's highest Sunni Muslim authority, to be assessed. Third, indecent and immoral content. Offensive subjects that taint the public morals, scenes of nudity, sex, foul language, and homosexuality are strictly censored. However, ironically, violent scenes or scenes depicting drug use are allowed. Similarly, in Turkey, censorship of content occurs both offline and online. Sensitive topics include Kurdish issues, the Armenian genocide, and topics deemed offensive to Islam or the Turkish state. In practice, access to official information remains challenging. Next, I'm going to give an overview about some existing policies and laws and their practices, shedding light on the gaps that they left behind. To start off, the Lebanese Constitution and International Declaration for Human Rights declares that freedom of expression is an assured citizen right. However, there are no existing laws and legal frameworks. The press law and broadcast law enforce high fees for licenses to create new media, therefore controlling the number of media outlets. We can see random filtering of information, content, and ideas by enforcing a haphazard censorship system, and media employees' rights are not adequately protected. Moving on to the censorship regulation, there are unclear censorship systems and regulations. The interference of governmental and religious officials declare the system as unbiased. Moreover, the lack of organization between different institutions results in an overlap in roles, responsibilities, and jurisdiction. The biasness of the Ministry of Information and other regulating bodies, including the judiciary, adhere to political and sectarian divisions in their administration and in the approval of licenses to different media channels. Also, the lack of funding for different media councils causes them to operate negligently. As for the role of media unions, due to outdated procedures and limited benefits, as well as biased influence, fewer journalists are partaking in unions, and the unions' incompetence and their lack of power to monitor media outlets and allowing the sectarian quotas to assign the heads of unions make them less credible. Taking a look at some laws passed in Turkey, we can see that in 2003, Turkey adopted a Freedom of Information law. However, no inquiries are allowed about state secret as it jeopardizes the national security, economic interests, state investigations, intelligence activity, or that violate the privacy of individuals. In 2014, the government enacted new laws that gave the state greater power over censorship and surveillance capabilities, including the ability to access any personal data without a court order. It also gave Amayeta, the National Intelligence Organization, immunity for legal violations and criminalized reporting on or inquiring about the Amayeta. They also used penal codes, criminal defamation laws, and the anti-terrorism to crack down on journalists and media outlets. They also pressured media owners financially to influence coverage of political issues. Media outlets were also raided and journalists detained in 2014 as part of an ongoing crackdown on supporters of exiled politicians. Moving on to the European Union, we can see the Lisbon Treaty in Article 7, which allows European Union institutions to take action against a series of breach by a member of state in regards for human rights. However, it is limited in effectiveness as it is used as the last resort. Reliable privacy and freedom of information defamation laws vary among members of EU countries restricting freedom of expression. The EU has little control over this area. Some EU countries are still without freedom of information, for example Cyprus and Spain. This affects the public knowledge of how decisions are being made. Now the underlying question is, does the Lebanese Censor Bureau have the qualifications required to draw the lines and make the adequate decisions? Also, do they follow an appropriate censorship system that preserves the rights of the subject being censored? Consequently, the censor's decision-making process reflects a sense of bias where their main objective is to appeal to the interests of government and religious officials. Despite of all the chaos surrounding the censorship issue, there remains much hope as activists and artists are still finding creative ways to bypass the system and speak up. In 2007, Media and Cultural Freedom, SCIVE, an organization established by Samir Qasir Foundation, a journalist who was assassinated in 2005, managed to screen and expose violations of freedom of the press and artistic expression. They launched Mamnua, which means prohibited, a mockumentary series on YouTube that shows behind the scenes in the General Directorate of General Security Censorship Department. In 2011, Marsad al-Raqaba, the Censorship Observatory, or the movement for reviewing censorship laws in Lebanon, which includes several independent cultural organizations and individuals, was established. They shed light on the chaos and corruption that was involved in the censorship process and how invested different political parties and religious leaders are. The organization is lobbying as we speak for an appraisal of censorship laws and regulations. I also asked Mr. Bajali to what extent has censorship in Lebanon led to self-censorship, and how he managed to bypass the system to project his thoughts and ideas.
And of course, self-censorship is the reason why I wrote the first play that got banned was all about self-censorship. It was called Will It Pass or Not? Why will it pass or not? Because the writer, before he writes something to submit it to the censorship bureau, he thinks, will this pass or will it not? And the problem is, it's a fraud. Yes, because already when you think about it, of course it's going to affect the way you write, especially if you have a deadline. What happens is that sometimes they don't just ban you or censor you, they postpone you. They tell you, okay, it's going to take 3 weeks. Usually it takes 3 days or 4 days, and then you're like 3 weeks, sometimes 2 months. I will surely self-censor if this will help me get my play done. And this is what they actually pressure you to do. They will tell you to remove them and come back to them with a new script. It's not them.
So manipulating the situation.
It's manipulating. The thing is, who influences their decisions? What influences their decisions? And also the list of things that they can ban are very, they would say like, a documentary about the Civil War got banned recently. So by centralizing this censorship and this bureau, what we are doing is that we're putting a lot of power in the hands of a few. And they can easily abuse it. And what happens is that the media, and the media people in Lebanon, they prefer to be on the good side of the general security for many reasons. For example, some plays that were improvised. I used to write anything, like a dummy script, not a real script. Yeah, I send it to them. I get an approval, knowing that they will, because I tell them like it's a small space. So they don't know exactly what improv means. So what I said is that this is the script. It's like really absurd, surrealistic, sad, melancholic, something that you would never read. Somebody would die reading the script. They said to themselves, it's gonna be a very boring, nobody's gonna watch this play anyway, so we're not gonna even go to see if it's gonna be done. It turned out to play for 2 years. You get to the point where films and media are being pressured from the moment you start off an idea. It's like from the seeds, when the seed is coming into the ground, from that moment, things change in your mind, knowing that there is censorship, knowing that at the end of the tunnel there's censorship. The beginning of the tunnel might change, and that's the danger. That's the biggest danger, because you might lose a really amazing script and play, not do it even, because it gets killed at the onset, and it's worse than abortion, because it's like killing life before that it is already kind of created.
In conclusion, freedom of expression cannot be achieved as long as media outlets are restricted, controlled, and manipulated, as long as harsh censorship is being practiced and politicians and religious authorities are influencing the censorship system. It has become a tendency for media outlets, journalists, artists, and others to avoid controversial topics, which has led them to self-censorship. This implies to the work that has not yet been accomplished, the suppression of ideas and thoughts. It is the unwritten books, the songs that have not been sung, and the empty canvases. In my opinion, this will unfortunately lead to the death of creativity and will hinder nations from ever progressing.